Hello, friends, and welcome. I'm Sara Lihz, and I have quite the card project for you today. I surprised myself with this one. I had kind of pictured everything in my head, and it turned out so much better than I thought. We're making a very simple box card. Don't be scared of the box card, and if you don't want to make a box, you can do this flat on a card. But we're going to ink blend a background. We're going to create a little camping scene. We're going to make the cutest little roasted marshmallow you've ever seen. Let's get started. This is the Camping Day die set from Pixi Dust Designs. This is a new release, but then these Woodland Critters I've used many times. This is an oldie, but a goodie, a very favorite of mine. And then you could alternatively use the Woodland Friends Stamp set. That would fit beautifully. They're a little more to scale, but I like die cutting. So here we go. This is 5.5 by 8.5, and I'm scoring at a 1/2 inch, 4 inches, 4.5 inches, and 1/2 inch. If you have a short scoreboard, score at a 1/2 inch and 4 inches, rotate, score at a 1/2 inch and 4 inches. And then I am just folding all of those like mountain folds, and they just wrap around and make a really simple box. Very, very simple. I'm going to cut a hole in the front. So I'm using this oval die, but there are lots of ways you could cut a hole. If you have a cutter with a sliding blade, you could just cut around the edges. You could do a circle die cut on either end and then just connect them with your cutter or with an X-Acto knife or something like that. This was easy. Check your mini slimline dies. A lot of those would fit in here too. This back panel is 5.5 by 3.5, and I'm just checking to make sure it fits well and that my sides will fold around that. If they don't, then you need to make some adjustments and just trim little slivers off until it fits right. I have never ink blended a night sky like this before, but I was like, I can do it. I've seen people do it. Let's give it a try. There's a moon in this set, and so where the moon is going to go, I'm using seedless preserves, and these are distress oxide inks. So if you don't ink blend a lot, these are really thick, and they sort of sit on top of the paper. So you can sort of push them around and move them around, and they're really great for beginner ink blenders. And I'm not really a beginner, but I felt like a beginner on this one because it was new for me. So anywhere where I'm like, that's too bright or that's too dark, I'm just going over it again. So I have Seedless Preserves, Uncharted Mariner, Chipped Sapphire, Villainous Potion, and then this is Pine Needles, but I'm going to add something else over the top of that later. I'm going to feel like there's too much of a blue-green, but I wanted to add in a little grass, and then I'm going to go over that with my Chipped Sapphire a little bit just to try to create a sky that comes all the way down. I felt like there was a little bit of a white border in between. And then this is Black Soot Distress ink, right? I didn't do the oxide. I feel like the black ink, distress ink, is darker. So I went around the edges. And then I am using the Starry Colors Kuretake metallic watercolors, and I am adding that just with a tiny little paintbrush to my sky to create some stars. And then this is Forest Moss, right? So this is more of like a yellow green, but still pretty dark. And I'm putting just a little bit over the top of that grass. And that did it for me. That made it work a little bit better. So once I was done with all of my ink blending and my stars and everything, I heat set the ink. It does take quite a while, at least where I live, where it's really humid, quite a while for those oxide inks to dry. When I first started using them, I struggled to get them completely dry. Use your heat tool and they will sort of turn chalky, right? They will fade back, and you look for that, okay? If they still look like the same color, keep running your heat tool over it, all right? You'll watch them change color just a little bit, and then you'll know that they're done. I have just laid out sort of the basics of my pieces for my scene here. All of this is the Camping Day die set. Nothing is complicated to put together. Okay, so for my trees, there is this little green piece that goes on top and then a brown piece that goes behind it to give us like the base of our tree. Tree trunk, that's what it's called, a tree trunk. And then I've ink blended on those. So the biggest tree you can see in the bottom right corner, it's a little bit lighter. I actually did the same thing on the other two, but that's wrong. The fire, we're gonna have like a little bonfire. That fire would not reach those trees, so I'm gonna go back over those and make them all the same color. On the tent, it's gonna be on the right of my card, the bonfire in the middle, and so I need the back of the tent to be darker. So I'm just coming in with some light brown inks to darken up that craft cardstock and give us that illusion of sort of the firelight changing, like where my lights and my darks are. This was, again, kind of a challenge, but I kind of walked through the whole thing in my head, trying to figure out where everything would go and what we would have to do to make this work. None of it's complicated, and I think it all worked pretty well. Again, I surprised myself on this one, so I hope you like it. So this is my tent. There are two little pieces for the poles. I've made like a brown canvas tent, but you can make a blue tent. If I was taking my boys camping, one would want a red tent, one would want a blue tent. My husband promised them that he would take them camping. This was, I don't know, back in March. We're getting to the end of summer, folks. They're back in school already. They have not gone camping. I wouldn't go camping in Nebraska in the summer either. It is gross outside, but they keep asking. They keep asking. Okay, so on the front of my tent, there is a piece that's larger. That's like the inside of the tent. And then here are the tent flaps that get folded back. I am thinking about making a version of this tent where I cut that hole that is the inside of the tent straight into that base piece and making a shaker out of it and like a little critter poking out from the inside of the tent. I have all kinds of ideas. There are so many cute pieces in here. I'm gluing down my trees, and they're 3 different sizes, and I'm playing with perspective. The Woodland Critters are actually a little bit big compared to the camping day dies. The stamp set I showed you is more in line with the size and scale of it, but I like dies. So I am putting the largest tree in the front, right? It's closest to us. The medium tree is sort of back behind that, so it's a little smaller. And then this teeny tiny tree is way back, right behind the tent. Then, because we're creating a box card, it pops up the critters so they're closer to us than the tent and the rest of the scene, and it doesn't seem weird that they're larger. If you don't want to make a box card and you want to do the same thing just on a regular card, you could pop them up on some foam and do something really similar to help create that depth and illusion of perspective. I'm going to glue my moon down here just right over that lightest portion of our sky, that little purple area. And I'll use my tweezers to remove any glue that's kind of seeping out. Those oxide inks are water reactive, so I'm really careful with my glue. If it oozes out, it can change the color of the ink, and I do not want that. Then I have my 2 little clouds, and I just cut those from some white cardstock. I thought about ink blending, right, and adding something darker on the edges, but it's a cute card, and I wanted some brightness in here. So I just kept them white and added a little bit of shimmer pen. Then I'm going to add my scene to the inside of my card. I'm just checking to make sure it fits, right? Please check first. Make sure that you can fold the card right on the crease that's closest to that back panel, both of the flaps, not just one, but both of them, because that will ensure that your card fits in your envelope well. I'm using wet glue so I can wiggle it and make sure I'm getting the side pieces lined up correctly and that I'm not overlapping either of those score lines. And then I will bring in my trimmer to remove that overhang from the tent. I thought about using scissors, but I was like, nope, girl, play it safe. Play it safe and bring in the trimmer. Okay, so I have a bottom flap here that's going to fold up. And then that top flap, as I sort of open the card all the way up, those 2 short flaps overlap each other. So I am adding tape to the very top flap on the inside of the card. It's double-sided tape. Then I'm going to add some wet glue. I want a little bit of wiggle room to make sure I get it perfect, but then when I press down, I want it to grab right away. So that's why I have both. I'm going to fold up that bottom flap. It's overlapping my seam. I'm going to fold just inside of that oval that we cut and press the whole thing flat. You want to make sure as you're adding your adhesive that you're doing it while your card is flat so that it fits well in the envelope. Sometimes I get lucky if I forget and I just sort of glue it while it's all open and boxy, and then it still folds flat, but sometimes it doesn't. So that's always my advice. Anytime you're working with an interactive element or a box card or anything like that, make sure when you add your adhesive that you're folding flat. Okay, so here is our little bonfire. We have 2 logs, and I'm just going to cross those, and then I have 2 pieces for the flames. And you guys, I'm struggling with my pickup stick. I've been struggling with it this whole video back when we were ink blending the trees. I don't know if you saw that. It was rough. It was rough. It's because it's covered in glue. I spent the next day making more cards and trying to figure out what in the world was wrong with it. Yeah, no, it's just, it wasn't wax. It was a glue stick. Clean off the wax tip of your pickup stick, guys. That'll help, I promise. Okay, here are my critters. I have a squirrel and then I have a porcupine hedgehog. The debate continues. And I am ink blending the left side of the squirrel. He will be facing the fire, right? So the fire will be on his right side. And I want to keep that side a little lighter, right? Like the light is hitting him. So I just came in with some ink and ink blended the back layer first since it needed a darker color ink. And then we'll go back later and ink blend over this cream cardstock. There are little pieces for the eyes and the nose, but if you don't like teeny tiny pieces, there are debossed lines on that cream cardstock. You can just go in with like a little fine liner pen and add them that way, and no one will know the difference. So now I'm coming in with my second critter, and I'm going to ink blend on this one too. And it looks pretty dark in the back. But for both of them, what I'm forgetting is that part of why it looks so dark is because the ink is wet, right? Wet cardstock looks darker than dry cardstock. Make sure you wait until your ink dries to really see what it's going to look like. So if I had this to do again, I would probably come back in on both of these with just, for the squirrel, a really dark brown, and for the hedgehog, porcupine, whatever he is. If you have a vote, tell me why you vote that way, because people vote, but then I'm like, how do we know? I want to know how we know. Anyway, I would come in with maybe some black soot on the back end of that critter because that brown cardstock is already very dark. I'm adding in, there's an eye, his nose, and then there's a little spot for his ear. Normally, I might do the ear like a pink or something, but because it's dark, right, the insides of things look darker. So I was like, let's keep that pretty dark, I think. Here, I'm coming in with that really light brown ink just to change that cream cardstock and give a little bit of shadowing there as well. And then this is the teeniest, tiniest, cutest little marshmallow you ever did see. The die cuts 3. And then I'm going to add it on to the end of a stick. And I thought about cutting 2 so that the squirrel could have one and our other critter could have one, but he didn't have any hands free. So I didn't. I don't know. Should he have gotten a marshmallow too? And where should I have put it? I'm going to add glue only at the very bottom of each of these pieces. So at the bottom of the campfire, and then right here, I've got just on his feet. For the squirrel actually overlaps the card base in a couple places, but I play it safe first. So I'll do just the feet and I will lay that down. And you can see I'm just tucking my finger inside the card, one, to get some pressure and really press that down. But I'm also checking to make sure I don't have any glue oozing up from behind my critters or my campfire. I don't want anything to touch that background or to glue my card shut. If you get a little glue on that oxide ink, again, it will change the color. So the tail overlaps as well, but again, I glued just his feet, and then I'll use the tip of my glue bottle to tack down the tail, and that just helps me make sure that I'm not over gluing. This little stick with the marshmallow, it's like it was made for that little squirrel. It fits perfectly and it overlaps the fire a little bit. I would love to tell you that was by design, but it wasn't. So I will glue the marshmallow to the fire, and that just adds a little bit of stability because that stick is not very big. I'm coming in with some dark gray cardstock, and I am heat embossing a happy birthday sentiment. It's a really thin font, and so I'm using my super fine detail white embossing powder to make sure that my letters don't get too thick or distorted. Then I will heat set that, and I just trimmed it out as tight as I could into a little rectangle, and I will layer that up on a little bit of matte silver cardstock. I didn't want it to overlap my scene too much, so it's just a little sentiment. You could certainly leave this off and just wait until you know what the occasion is for. You know I do that. And then I am adding glue right along the top, just the top, and then into that right-hand corner. So again, I don't have any glue that's going to end up on my background, and you can see me sort of checking underneath there and making sure I don't have glue oozing out where it shouldn't go. And then I'm going to add a piece of, this is a very pale gray cardstock to the back, so I have a place to write my sentiment. This is 3 1/4 by 5 1/4. I'm going to use temporary adhesive for this, so I can actually pull it off to write my message and then re-add it onto the back of the card. Otherwise, there's a lot of texture and it might get hard to write on that. There's very little bulk here. This will mail for regular postage, and it packs, I think, a lot of punch in all that dimension and ink blending, and there's some sparkle and glitter in the background. I hope you guys like this card. I loved making it. If you're new to my channel, please hit that subscribe button, give it a thumbs up, and I will see you next time.